Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay. I'm here to talk about a comment that was made on national TV like a day ago by Brian Kilmeade, a Fox analyst that appears on Our Nation, the TV show on Fox. He mentioned he was talking about Kamala Harris, and he mentioned that she wouldn't be able to do her duties as vice president and be where she had to be for this specific event because she was at a a colored sorority, in reference, of course, to her affiliation with the AKAs, a famous African American sorority house. And of course, he denied this. He said a college sorority. Look, the words college and colored don't sound anything alike. They're two completely different words with two completely different etymologies. So, how could he make this mistake? It's a simple thing that we call a Freudian slip. He meant to say what he said because Brian Kilmeade, this isn't the first time that he's made comments such as this. He's made them before. One time, Brian said, and I quote, "Our problem is that we marry other ethnicities and species." He and another host were talking about, at least what's going on. He and another host were talking about Alzheimer's disease. And he mentioned what he hypothesized why Alzheimer's disease is less prevalent in, say, the Swedes than other groups. And he said, well, the problem with us Americans is that we marry other ethnicities and species. We marry Irish and Italians and black people, right? Of course, he had to apologize for this. Another thing that he said in the past, a man who was captured by the Taliban by the name of Bo Bangdal. He was held captive by the Taliban from 2009 to 2014. Brian Kilmeade got on the show and said that the man's father looked like the Taliban. So obviously, this is not the first time, it probably won't be the last, that Brian slips up like this. Fox News, of course, is gonna Fox News. But this is a bigger point that I just wanted to bring up, that Kamala Harris is gonna have to face comments like this for the next 4 years, from 2024 or 25 to 2028, and maybe the next 8 years, maybe up to 2032. Who knows? If she wins re-election, she's gonna have to face this kind of vitriol from Fox News. This is what's ahead in the future, and from conservatives in general. And in many ways, it's worse than what it was under President Obama. And I'll tell you why. Before, and we talked about this in the 2010s review video, before, and during most of President Obama's term, especially his first term, people were walking on eggshells in regards to saying things that were racial, because the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s taught us about political correctness. And sometimes, you know, and people mostly abided by that, especially the conservatives. The conservatives at that time put up a pretense that they were not racist. But once Trump started doing his birther deal in 2011, and his campaign started becoming more emboldened as the 2010s progressed, and then he became president. Now all gloves are off with conservatives. You have conservatives out there who will say the most unadulterated racist remarks on television. And not that Lisa says she's a woman, a black woman, and an Indian woman. Yes, I was going to bring that up, Lisa. Thank you for reiterating that. If Kamala becomes president, you guys realize that if Kamala becomes president, it's more historic than President Obama, and I'll tell you why. She is she is the only woman, that's for sure, ever to become president. We know that. But she is the only not, she'll be the only not white person with no Caucasian ancestry whatsoever to ever be the president of the United States. She has no Caucasian ancestry. Her ancestry is Indian and black. Every other president, President Obama included, has been a Caucasian and a man. Were she to become president, she'd be the only non-white person to ever be the president of the United States. And that is pretty historic, considering the United States. And I feel like that is a bigger milestone than being a woman. Sure, I mean, being a woman is a big thing, but the country wasn't built against women and specifically for men. It kind of was because society was, a patriarchal society. It comes out of European culture and a patriarchal culture, of Europe. Of course it was. But other Western countries have had, um, you know, female leadership in the past. Golda Meir, Indira Gandhi, even uh, even Pakistan has had female a female PM before. So it's a huge deal, but in a sense, it isn't. Margaret Thatcher comes to mind in England, especially since England and the United States have, cultural continuity relationships with each other. So I feel like being a, but you got to remember the difference with those women and Kamala Harris is that those women, the women I just named, uh, are on the conservative wing of their countries. Golda Meir, of course, she started off as a leftist, but during the time that she was prime minister of Israel in the late 60s and early 70s, she, she gradually shifted to the right. And of course, Margaret Thatcher was a notorious conservative kind of rebirth um, conservatism in England at the time. But Kamala Harris is she's liberal. She's a left-wing politician. So they're going to portray her. Even women commentators like Candace Owens, for example, will portray her as kooky, as incompetent, because many people believe that women cannot handle such a big responsibility. Despite the fact that there have been women heads of state forever in even uh, male-dominated societies, such as most societies. Most societies are male-dominated societies because when societies started off, the economy was based on agriculture, and obviously, from a biological standpoint, men are better at agriculture than women are. Of course, we've advanced to a higher level where we no longer think that, but people's minds haven't changed. But the fact that she is not white, considering that the laws in this country were specifically built to hold back people of color, is going to be historic. You know what I mean? If she were to win. Because at least when it came to President Obama, people could say, well, his mom was still a white lady. You know what I mean? He still had historic lineage to what they consider as historic white America. Kamala Harris does not have that. Now, her lineage is from Jamaica and India, respectively. She's not. She doesn't even have um, Black American lineage either. You know, you know what I mean? Which I don't know could affect her in African American spaces. I don't think so, but who knows? Maybe it could. Maybe some people will say, well, like they say with Drake, well, he doesn't share um, the historical experiences of uh, other people in the African American community. So he's know so I don't know. Maybe that could be but I haven't really seen that. I've seen some people um, online, Black Twitter spaces say some shit like that. You know, there are some Black Trump supporters that I've seen, that say, well, she's not technically um, African American because her family's from Jamaica and India. So, you know, but again, like I said, when we came to this conversation about the founders of hip hop, yeah, they weren't. Some of them weren't technically African American, right? Some of them were Jamaican or whatever ethnicity they were. But much like them, uh, she grew up African American. She joined the African American sorority. So if we're going to split hairs like that, you know, then we're being stupid because then you could disqualify Barack Obama. Then, I mean, that's one of the whole things that has me irked about this whole "not like us" movement. You know what I mean? Because now it's like now we're gonna split hairs this way in every single argument and use that as a justification to disqualify everybody. And Lisa wanted me to touch on JD Vance's comment of calling her a miserable cat lady. Now, a childless miserable cat lady or a childless cat lady was the miserable. He didn't say, but he implied it. Um, yeah, Kamala Harris has stepchildren. And here's another thing that makes her very unique. It doesn't make her unique that she has stepchildren because James Buchanan, the 15th president of the United States, had no children and was unmarried. And some people think was gay, and most likely was gay. But so that shouldn't, whether or not he has children, she has children, shouldn't even matter. But because she's a woman, she's judged to a different standard. And JD Vance is trying to say that's her only value in life, having children. You know, if she doesn't have children, then she has no value. He's on record as saying that women that have no children, should not be allowed to vote. And one of the reasons why he says this is because childless women tend to vote Democrat. Childless single women tend to vote Democrat, and white married women with lots of children or children at all tend to vote Republican. So, of course, being a Republican politician, somebody childless or somebody unmarried would be in his best interest. But Kamala Harris is married. She's married to Douglas Emhoff, and she has stepchildren. Now, whether or not you consider stepchildren to be children, stepchildren are most certainly the children of the people who are their step parents, because it takes a lot more for a person, a man or a woman, to step up to the plate when they don't have to than when they have to, technically, because it's their biological child. You know, it takes a lot. You know, it kind of, it defies your expectations. You know what I mean? As a person, you know what I mean? Because we have a selfish nature within us as human beings, that we only want to take care of ourselves, and the things that directly concern us. But to take on another child that is not yours, like being an adopted parent or being a step parent, it says a lot about your character as a person. So I actually commend her for that. But what he said was totally fucked up. Now, here's here's another unique aspect to it that I've never thought of. And Lisa, what do you think? Do you think that her marriage to Douglas Emhoff, a white man, will affect her in the polls with the African American community voting for her, especially black men? Because we know there are people, just like there are people in the white community, we know there are people in the white community that are against interracial marriage. And we know there are people in the black community that are also against interracial marriage, such as people like Omar Johnson, who he never stops saying anytime a black celebrity is married to a white person, that, you know, condemning that person. So people that are of his, you know, think like him, won't necessarily come out to vote for somebody like Kamala. You know what I mean? All these things you have to really factor in, because this is her situation is unprecedented as far as when it comes to this in these things in our history in politics. We've never had. I mean, we've had it on a local level. In New York, we had it, and um, you know, Mayor De Blasio married to he had an African American wife. Um, but on a national level, no, we have never had that. You know what I mean? Now, it could be the case that people will ignore all that because it's Trump, and people just don't want Trump back, and they'll just ignore it, and they'll be like, "Oh well, there's no way in hell I'm voting for Donald Trump." You know what I mean? So I'll take the other person, despite I might not agree with some of their choices. Mhm. Yeah, at least it says he thinks people will ignore it because they don't want Trump. That's what I believe. I often said if Barack Obama were married to a white woman and Michelle Obama was white instead of black, would the African American community have embraced him as much as they did, especially black women? I don't think so. I believe I don't think so, from what I know. You know what I mean? It, interracial marriage in this country is something that is different. Um, something that is relatively new for people in this country, both black and white. Lisa says, but besides the Umar Johnson, nobody cares about who you marry anymore. Um, I don't know about that, Lisa. I mean, Omar Johnson has a platform. Umar is popular. You know what I mean? But there are people that are less popular that do care. I mean, people came out against Gabe Sidibe. People came out against Serena Williams. People came out against, um, you know, Mario, the singer. you know, Lisa says they got over it though. Yeah, they did. They did. You know, and yeah, Lisa says they were just mad it wasn't with them, and because they're a famous person. Yeah, I get what you mean. Like, some of these people, uh, they might have had crushes on. I never saw a person with a crush on a politician, so I don't think it will be such an issue when it comes to that. Maybe it will be. I don't know. I never saw, somebody say, oh, such and such that was a senator is sexy, or I would take her home, or I would take, women say they would take him home. I never saw that. You know what I mean? So this is really a lot of some people. Yeah, women love Obama. Women love Kennedy. So those are the exceptions to the rule. But most politicians, no. And I don't know any guys that are saying that about Kamala. You know what I mean? That she's an attractive woman. Not take. I mean, look, uh, she looks better than Sarah Palin. And way better than some of these other women that, Theresa May, uh, the former Prime Minister of Britain, you know, Golda Meir, some of these older ladies, that have been, presidents of certain countries. So the thing is, politicians rarely have people crushing on them because usually when you get into politics, you're older, so it's different. You know what I mean? But what I meant was not that they want to like her or they wish they would get with her, but that they would feel like her values doesn't reflect the values of the other people in the black community. But I haven't really seen that. So because you always have these discussions, you even having discussions with regional candidates, like we talked about with JD Vance yesterday, where people from Appalachia, white people from Appalachia, like his ethnicity, you know what I mean? They're like saying, well, he's not a real hillbilly or whatever. He's faking it. So you have always these arguments that, oh, this person isn't real or whatever. They're not really uh, bona fide. But today also, this is a little off topic, but Kamala Harris made her first like kind of formal press conference since becoming the candidate. I mean, she made an informal one where where Joe Biden was on the phone saying that he was proud of her and stuff. But like her first official sit down with Benjamin Netanyahu, where she discussed Gaza. And I was really impressed by her because for the first time ever since we've known her from a public standpoint, she appeared to be professional. Yeah. She met with Netanyahu. Netanyahu sat down with her because obviously I think Netanyahu, first of all, he doesn't like Trump anymore. Him and Trump, had a very public falling out. So I think he's kind of giving his endorsement to her because why would he ask to meet with her? He obviously believes that she has a better chance of winning than Donald Trump. You know what I mean? And that he's gonna have to be working with her for the next 4 years. Um, and I was really impressed by her. How she held herself together. She appeared presidential. Will say that. You know what I mean? She basically talked about, putting the pressure on him to get a ceasefire in Gaza because, this is going on long enough. I mean, don't you think, and this is what she was saying in so many words, don't you think the people of Gaza have suffered enough for the things that Hamas did on October 7th? By the time she gets closer to the White House and we get closer to the election, it will be past a year that this conflict has been going on. Enough is enough already. Man, how much do you want to destroy these people? That's what she was basically saying. And I was really impressed by that. You know what I mean? Because working with Israeli leadership has been contentious for some presidents. Not all the. I have this one book where it details every single American president's dealings with the various prime ministers of Israel over the years, over the 75 years that Israel has existed as a state. From Harry Truman to Eisenhower. He says, it'd be crazy if a woman has him stop this war. It might be. I mean, hey, this is something that every president has had to deal with. the Middle East conflict for 75 years anyway. Not every president, because obviously George Washington wasn't dealing with it. The older president, because there was no such thing as Israel back then. But for the last 75 years, um, this is something that every president has had to deal with. You know, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, George Bush Jr., Obama, Trump, and Biden, and different presidents have dealt with it differently. Some have gotten along well with the various prime ministers of Israel over the years. Starting with Ben Gurion and now to um, Prime Minister Netanyahu. You know, but Netanyahu he never really liked Biden. He never really liked Clinton. He kind of got along with Clinton a little bit, in the late '90s because he had to. You know what I mean? Because Clinton was the president and he was the prime minister. Um, but they never. He never liked Obama. That was for sure. We talked about this several times. He and Obama didn't get along. He and Trump were like boyfriends at one point, but then when he refused to back um, Trump, when Trump struck against Qasem Soleimani in 2019, and he refused to send troops. I don't know. I think he was a little bit. Why he didn't like Obama? I think he was a little bit. He kind of felt that Obama was more sympathetic to the Muslims, because Obama made that speech at Al Azhar University in 2009, the first time that an American president addressed a group of Muslims and was sympathetic to their plight. Because Obama had more sympathies to the Muslim world than any other American president. I mean, yes, his father was a Muslim, but his father was a non-practicing Muslim. That's one thing, and he never knew his dad. But his stepfather, Barry, not Barry Soetoro, but he's Barry Soetoro. But his stepfather was an Indonesian Muslim, and Obama grew up in the most populous Muslim country, the country in the world with the most Muslims in the world, which is Indonesia, for part of his life. So Obama was way more sympathetic and way more understanding to uh, the Muslim side of it than any other American president, and he made that pretty clear. And plus, because Obama told them, the Israelis, to stop building these settlements in the West Bank that they've been building for years now, since the 1967 war. These are illegal settlements. According to the UN, this land, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, were designated to the Arabs, in the split of 1947. You know what I mean? So the fact that the Israelis captured them and never gave them back and are continuing to build settlements within those territories that the United Nations told them that they couldn't. A lot of American presidents before Barack Obama looked the other way, whereas Obama didn't. Obama threatened to withhold aid from the state of Israel if they continued to do this. And they, of course, they stopped for a while, while he was president. But once he lost the election and became not president again, Trump fully endorsed them, including wanting to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, acknowledging basically that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel, even though Jerusalem was not included in the split decision. Because in 1947, Lisa, the British were already positioning to move out of the Middle East, and they decided, much like they did with India and Pakistan, to split the country up into two parts. The Muslims get a part and the Jewish people get a part. And the part that the Jewish people got, Jerusalem, was not part of that. You know what I mean? So it was never their capital officially. Now people are going to say, well, it was their capital, in the Bible days. But I'm talking about from this split in 1947. You know what I mean? So no country in the world really acknowledged that that was ever their capital before Trump did so in 2017. You know what I mean? And they loved him for that. And also he solidified their connection to the Golan Heights, which technically the United Nations considers as part of Syria and not part of Israel, because it was part of Syria before the 6 Day War. You know what I mean? So they even named the Golan Heights, it's always called the Golan Heights, but they renamed it Trump Heights in honor of him, the settlements they built. But like I said, in 2019, when Trump was going ahead and striking Qasem Soleimani, I guess trying to impress Netanyahu, because Netanyahu has been wanting uh, the United States to go to war with Iran for years now, since he got back in office in 2009. He's been talking about the threats of Iran, the threat Iran poses. Even when he addressed Congress just yesterday, he was still talking about the threats that Iran poses. And when Trump struck out against this Iranian guy, the Israelis didn't even back him. So you know how Trump is. If you offend his ego personally and you don't reciprocate something that he feels that he's done for you, he takes it personal, and then he came out against Netanyahu. So they no longer get along. They're not friends like they used to be. And they used to be really close because during the time that Netanyahu was the ambassador, the UN ambassador for Israel to the United States, that was during the late 70s and 80s, when Trump was beginning his career in real estate, and he was a huge name in New York. You know what I mean? So they were friends for years. And Americans like Netanyahu because he speaks English. He grew up here in the United States. He grew up in Florida. Not Florida, Philadelphia. He immigrated here as a small boy, so he doesn't speak with an Israeli accent. He speaks pure American English. And if you didn't know better, and you watch him address Congress either yesterday or you watched him in 2015, you would think this guy is running for president of the United States. And he is an American politician because he speaks with a clear American accent. He speaks with you wouldn't even know if his name wasn't Benjamin Netanyahu. You wouldn't even know that he's from another country. That he speaks pure good English, pure good American English with no accent whatsoever. And he understands American culture because he grew up here. So he's able to speak to Americans in a way that other politicians from Israel or from other parts of the world are not able to speak with Americans. But one thing about him is he's very duplicitous. Like, he'll say one thing in front of the American audience, but he'll say another complete other thing to the Hebrew speaking Israeli audience, his audience in his country. I mean, he's not the first Israeli politician to do this. Golda Meir, tying it back into women, who was the first female prime minister of Israel. She too was an American citizen. Her family was uh, born in Ukraine. She was born in Ukraine, but when she was a small girl, she moved to Wisconsin, and she grew up in Wisconsin. And then when she was a teenager, a young adult, she moved to Israel, and she began to uh, live in Israel, and eventually became the prime minister of Israel. So she too was Americanized. She too spoke with an American accent, reminded people of America. So she had that connection. Back then with the American people, like Netanyahu has now. You know, One of the only two countries besides Guyana to have a naturalized American citizen be the prime minister of their country is Israel. But yeah, the the rivalry between Barack Obama and Netanyahu is well publicized in the media, at least during the 2010s. It's something that we talked about in the 2010s review video. When he first addressed Congress in 2015, he kind of spoke over Obama, and you could tell when they sat in a room together, they really didn't like each other. And who knows? He grew up in America, so like his attitudes towards black people probably were informed by growing up in America. He grew up in America, of course, as a white guy. You know what I mean? Because he's an Israeli, but he's of Polish descent. Like most of the upper echelon of of Israel, all the founders of Israel, all the founding fathers of Israel, and all the early prime ministers. In fact, all the prime ministers, besides I think the last one they had before Netanyahu in 2022, Yair Lapid. He was of Romanian descent, but still is Eastern European. But all the prime ministers of Israel have been of men of European descent, mostly Polish descent or Ukrainian descent. You know, they had a president, which in Israeli politics, a president is kind of like a vice president here in the United States. It's under the prime minister. The prime minister is number one, and the president is number two. They had a president um, for a while that was of Persian descent, Middle Eastern Jewish descent. But that was about it. Other than that, the upper echelon of Israeli politicians have all been, white men of European descent. So obviously, when he grew up here in America, when he was living here in America, his views about black people, I'm sure, were informed by other white Americans around him. So he probably didn't like Obama for that reason too. What I mean? He was probably racist. What I mean? Because sometimes when American Jews move to Israel, they have those same ideas about racism that they had here in the United States that were drilled into them as white Americans, and they apply that to the racial dynamics within the new society that they come to. A prime example of this would be um, Rabbi Meir Kahane, who was a rabbi from Brooklyn, who started the Jewish supremacist group, the Jewish Defense League, in 1968 to to counter the Black Panthers in Brooklyn, and he moved to Israel in the 80s, and he was kicked out of the Israeli Congress, the Israeli Knesset, for racism because he still didn't get over his racism uh, in regards, that he had learned here in the United States, and he had tried to apply it to there, and it just, they weren't having it there. Of course, but that was the 80s. Since then, I feel like Israeli society has become more and more racist. Since that time. You know, there are many people that they write graffiti on the walls in regards to Mayor Kahane because he was shot. He was kicked out of Israel when he came back to the United States, and he was shot in 1992 by an Egyptian national. But many people in Israel remember him, and there's slogans written on the wall by people that remember him, and they write things like "Kahane was right," you know what I mean? Arabs to the gas chambers. So even though he wasn't successful in Israel and he was kicked out and shamed by the government at that time, his racist ideas, still live on by some Israeli extremists, including Netanyahu. Uh, what many people don't know about Netanyahu is that he was responsible for the only political assassination that has ever occurred in Israeli society in all of its history, the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin in 1992. 1995. Sorry. In 1995, by a Jewish extremist, Yigal Amir, because in 1993, Yitzhak Rabin has signed a peace agreement called the Oslo Peace Agreement, in which Israel was supposed to return the West Bank and Gaza back to the Palestinians. And that was considered to be the historic peace agreement that was going to bring the two sides together for the first time in 100-something years. But Yitzhak Rabin was murdered, and that never came to fruition. And during that time, Netanyahu he was no longer living in the United States. He had gone back to Israel, and he was amping up the opposition. He was making it seem like Rabin was a traitor. Rabin was the next Hitler. Rabin was a Nazi. And he got people in a frenzy, and he got this one kid in a frenzy, Yigal Amir, to such an extent that he went on and shot the prime minister. So people haven't really. I guess people have kind of forgotten it because look how popular BB is. At least before 2020 and 2021, when people were trying to get him out of the government for corruption. For the last 3 or 4 years. But after October 7th, people kind of forgot about it. But Lisa is absolutely correct. If a woman were to bring this to a closure, it would be historic. You know what I mean? And this is something that every American politician, every president has tried in the past to do something big as far as a landmark in the peace process, but most have been unsuccessful. Clinton was the one in my timeline I've been alive. Clinton was the one who came the closest because the Oslo Accords, which he didn't really have anything really to do with. Israeli leadership and Palestinian leadership did it on their own. Without the Americans really knowing anything about it, they kind of brokered the deal themselves. You know what I mean? But he oversaw it and he did it. The same thing with honestly, the same thing with the one between Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, and Menachem Begin, the prime minister of Israel in the 1970s. Sadat and Begin kind of did that on their own. Jimmy Carter just got the credit for it. You know what I mean? But um, and of course, Trump and Jared Kushner tried uh, um, with the Abraham Accords, and Obama tried, you know, during his tenure, but nothing has ever really worked. But I don't know. Biden really didn't. Biden's tenure didn't really. You didn't really see him really sit down with any Israeli or Palestinian leadership trying to broker this thing out at all. You know, the peace process in the last, I would say, about 18, 19 years have come to a real standstill, especially since the Israelis pulled out of Gaza in 2005, and a year later, the Gazans elected Hamas as their government, you know, throwing out Fatah. So there hasn't been any real talks in the peace process. But hopefully, Kamala Harris can revive that. You know what I mean? I do give the Trump administration credit for the Abraham Accords. They did do something for the overall region, but it didn't do anything for specifically the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis. You know, it was done for a specific strategic reason, and you kind of saw glimpses of that in uh, Netanyahu's speech. You know, they want the Arab countries and the Arab League to be on board with the war against Iran. Uh, Netanyahu really wants this war against Iran. You know what I mean? And I think Kamala Harris won't be manipulated into this war against Iran. I'm not sure Trump will be manipulated into it. You know what I mean? Because if you could convince Trump that he could possibly overthrow the Ayatollah in Iran and bring about a Western style democracy in Iran for the first time since 1979, he will do that. You know what I mean? Because Trump wants his name in the record books like that. So it's way off topic, but yeah, this asshole and JD Vance, another asshole, made a disparaging remark towards Kamala Harris, and he didn't really apologize because he didn't own, you know, Brian Kilmeade. He didn't own up to it. Anyway, guys, thank you, Lisa, for contributing. Don't forget to hit the like button, to hit the like button, and hit the bell button. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to see when my next video is coming up. Love you guys.